Welcome back to the Shenandoah Public Library's Summer Imagine 2020 sewing classes. I'm here with Star Ann Cloverdance, and my name is Joyce Stortvet, and we are excited to present to you the Dragon and Unicorn Cowl pattern from Coley Knight, who graciously allowed us to make classes based on her free pattern available on her website and linked in the description below. So we hope that you will enjoy this and put your imagination to work.
And if you decide to make this project, she has a tutorial also that would be helpful to figure out what you're doing a little bit.
Sure. We're doing ours a little bit modified. Here's the modified one that I made. We're doing one that will be modified with a scarf instead of a cowl. So
there's the cowl on this one.
Yeah, so there's the dragon pattern. We'll be doing a unicorn, but perhaps a little bit different unicorn than you imagined.
So, if you decide to make the pattern with the cowl, and the dragon or the unicorn with the cowl, what you need to remember is that if you're using a fleece fabric, it is the same on the right and the wrong side. And this pattern has what I would call a mirror image. It has a definite left and a definite right side. So make sure that when you're putting it together that you're lining those up appropriately. It's very easy to flip the right and wrong sides of the fabric. And it wouldn't matter if you didn't have this specific shape on each side.
So on the one that we're doing, where it does, the two sides do match, it won't matter at all.
No, we don't have to worry about that. So that's a good thing for what we're doing. Now, we talked about your pattern, we talked about the grain line last time when we sewed together, and so we're not going to go over that today, but just know that these pattern pieces do have a grain line on them, and so you'll want to think carefully about how you're placing your pattern pieces. So, last time we sewed with a 5/8 inch, which a lot of garment construction does. This time in the pattern, and when you're reading your pattern all the way through, you might want to highlight some of those things that you need to remember. And this says 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I've adjusted our seam guide to 1/2 inch. It shows how to lay out the pieces for the lining. And you'll notice that it kind of gives you an idea, making sure that these pattern pieces with that specific side, but again, watch the right and wrong side of your fabric. Then we're going to make the ears for the very first thing. And here's the pattern sheet that tells us how we're going to do the ears. And Joy, what we did, here's an ear already attached to this front of the hood. And so we cut the front part of the ear out of the black fleece, and we cut the inside of the ear out of red felt because we thought it would give it a little more body.
I have found when I've been making different things like the eyes and stuff, that it really does, instead of having to use a fusible web, having a little bit of felt instead of a fleece gives it a little more stiffness.
Stability, yep. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch right around here. Again, we're going to leave the straight edge open because we have to turn this inside out. So we're going to stitch 1/2 inch seam, leaving the straight edge open. So I'm going to start here and go all the way around this way. And I'm going to take a few stitches forward and then back stitch. And here we go around the edges. You notice I'm keeping that edge right up against the seam guide and going just at a speed that I can gently guide the edges up against the seam guide. If I go too much faster, I won't be able to make that turn. And when I get up here to the point of the ear, I'm going to guesstimate where there's a 1/2 inch. I'm going to turn it and see, I might one more stitch because I only want to take one stitch. I'm going to turn the wheel toward me and do it by hand. I want to make sure the needle stays in the down position when I'm done stitching. There. I'm going to take this pin out and stitch the rest of the way around. That pin. And ease that back up. Now, again, I have a point. And last time we sewed, we graded seam allowances and cut that bulk out of there. So we're going to do that again this time. I'm going to cut off the point, just down about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little less from the stitching. And I'm going to come around and trim this off in here, just to make it a little easier for that seam to fill out when I want to turn it inside out. And I cut the first one, now I'm going to go back and cut the second one just a smidgen bit bigger. And that's the grading part. And notice I'm not measuring this, I'm just doing this somewhat by eye. Scraps. Now, I'm going to take this and turn it inside out. And kind of smooth that seam out. I'm going to use my trusty turner again. And I'm going to gently poke out the point of the ear without going through the fabric, so I don't want to push too hard. And I'm going to run that point kind of along where that seam is to kind of turn that out a little better. And because we graded those seam allowances, it turns really nice. Now, the directions tell us that we've sewn the ears and we've trimmed the seam. Now we're going to fold the ears, and on the pattern there's a line that says to fold it.
To you. There you go.
This will be facing
there.
like this when we get them up on that. And to hold that, I'm just going to baste this right across there real fast with the machine. And that's about 1/4 of an inch seam. I don't want a full 1/2 inch on that because it's going to be caught in the seam allowance. Now, we've done that, so now we're going to take our hood. And on the pattern of our hood, there is a dart. And this is what the dart looks like. And you can see the red from where the ear's enclosed in that dart. And this is a marking that's on your pattern, so you'll transfer the markings to the fabric. And then there's a cutting line, and then you'll cut, and then you will put the ear inside the dart and stitch it, and it'll look like that. See, I've got it going the right way. Red. Okay, good. So I'm going to pick this up, and I'm going to find my mark where the ear needs to be. I'm going to insert it in here, line up the raw edges, and when I'm sewing my dart, I'm starting wider edge here and stitching down to a point here where I stitch off. That's how you make a dart, whether you're stitching for something like this or stitching for clothing. It's wider at one end and narrows to nothing on the other edge. And I'm going to just pin that in place because we want it to stay there. Line up this edge. And I'm going to put the other pin on the other side of the dart, right on the other side of the ear, right there. And now we're going to stitch that together. And there's, you probably can't see them now, but there were some little yellow marks right there, and they're very faint. I can still see them. So this is where I'm going to start stitching. And I'm going to stitch like that down to here. I am not going to use my seam guide, and if you wanted to, you could draw a line for that. But for what we're doing, I am going to just eye this to here. Remember, I'm not watching my needle as it's stitching. I'm watching where I'm going. So this is a perfect example of how that works. I can feel that I'm coming to the thickness. I'm going to slow down a little bit. Over the ears. Pin out of there and coming down to that point. And stitching right off that fold. And then back stitching. There we go. Make sure I caught both sides, which we did. My threads. And there's the other ear. So now we have the back curve of the head, sides facing, the ear insides facing, the folds going towards the top, and we're ready to put this together. But before we put this together, we have the mane to do. So our mane is over here, and what I've already done, I've traced the pattern, 2 pieces together, and a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the outside edge. Right here, we need to clip this down to, but not through, the stitching. And that'll make that flip out a little better. Just a little clip like that. Now, let's see, I think, where's my, here it is. My thread was a little short. I'm going to pull this back because I don't want to have to rethread the needle again. There. Now, I'm going to turn this inside out. And in the directions, there's a special placement for where this mane is attached to the hood. Fleece is easy to sew with. It's very forgiving. And no ravelly seams. You know, I don't like that. That's kind of clumpy in there, isn't it? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to flip that back out, and I'm going to grade that just a little bit, just like we've been doing. Because see all that that's wadded up in there? That's why that doesn't fold nicely. So that's easy to take care of. We're just going to come back, and we're going to, that's kind of a sharp curve, and a lot of fabric in there, so we're just going to come back and grade this again. Trim this down, and because this doesn't ravel, it works great to do that. And there we go. Get rid of that bulk, and we'll get rid of a little more bulk. The first one's always harder because you don't want to cut into the seam allowance, and this one's a bit wider. And I'm going to come up this way just a little bit as well. And this way. You can see how much we cleared out of there that won't have to fit into that little part of the mane. Oh yes, just already you can tell that's better. We'll take our turner. And kind of press that seam. Bring that around this way. And do the same thing. Look what a difference that made just by taking that bulk out of that corner. And here's the rest of our mane. This would be a good place to lightly, with this fabric you can't use a real hot iron, but just lightly press this seam so that it folds right on that seam right there before you do anything else with it. But it's rolling over. So when I read my directions, there was something I noticed. Here's the part about the darts. I did that. Okay. And there's how to do the dragon's spikes and the unicorn's mane. There was something right here that I highlighted. For the unicorn mane, start at the ear seam. That's the dart. Be sure the curved end of the mane is at the back of the neck of the cowl. So, that's an important piece of information. So here's our ear seam, or our ear dart, and our instructions say to start at the ear seam. And there's where it shows us how we're going to do that. We're going to put the mane sandwich the mane between the cowl. So, we're going to put this like this. And there's the ear seam. That's that dart right there. And I'm going to make sure that these seam allowances lay open like this so there won't be quite so much bulk there. And I'm going to pin this. And I really only have to pin this right now just to this one side, just to get it in place. Shouldn't do that. Okay. There we go. Bringing it all the way around. Making sure these raw edges are even and lined up with this raw edge of the hood. Come right around like that. There we go. So when we stitch it, then it'll come around and you'll have your little unicorn tail.
You want to do that again?
And so then when we bring it around, and after we've stitched it the right sides together, it'll be encased in the seam, and you'll have your little unicorn tail.
Mane.
Mane.
Unicorn mane.
Mane, sorry. Thank you. Okay, so it's pinned. Now we have to bring this piece, and we have to make sure we have right sides together again. And we have to have our dart and open up our seam allowance. You can see how much thickness there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers here. So that's going to be thick, and we're going to have to stitch that carefully. The good news is that this is very soft fabric, so it'll be easy to do that. And what I'm going to do is just pin that here, because we didn't pin forward. But now we will be stitching there. So these will be lined up. This is where we're going to take another 1/2 inch seam. And you can see now that there'll be 4 layers here holding this together. I'm using a lot of pins because this is a curve and this will slide around on us if we're not careful. So, I want a pin, it's not flying somewhere. Now, let's just check and make sure we're doing this the way we want to. After we've stitched it and we turn it inside out, there's the unicorn mane, there are the ears, And there we go. It'll open up flatter when we get rid of the pins. Okay, so now let's stitch. Sure all these seams are opened and flat. And I'm going to stitch up to that pin and then pull the pin out and not stitch over it. And I want to make sure those seam allowances are laying flat. Yep. If they fold over, it'll really get bulky.
A few moments later.
So we're coming to the end, and stitch off the main. And when I come off of the main right there, I'm going to back stitch just a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of come around for the curve of the neck and stitch off to the edge. And back stitch. And done. Put my thread. Now, right here, where there's this curve, we're going to make a tiny little clip so that opens up and lays better. I'm going to turn this right side out. There's our main. There's our main, there's our ears. Let's clip that thread. I'm sewing with this lighter gray thread, so it kind of shows up against this, but if you were sewing this at home, you'd want to use your black thread that would blend in with that. The good news is that the fleece is so spongy that it kind of takes in the thread and it doesn't really show. So there's our unicorn ears and our mane and the body of the hood. Now we have a lining. The lining is made exactly the same way as the hood. The darts have been sewn, no ears. We don't have to worry about the ear placements here, just the darts. And then we sewed all the way around the shape of the top. Now, we did change this a little bit from the pattern, Joy, because in the pattern it says to leave 3 or 4 inches here open, because we would stitch across, and what we did on this one is we stitched across the bottom of the cowl. And then we went back and closed that seam with a ladder stitch, and you can't even tell where we did that. This one we're not going to do that because we're going to leave this bottom open and turn this inside out. And so then we won't have to worry about doing that from in here because we're going to attach the scarf. So when we put the lining and the hood together, we put the right sides together. Right side, there's the seam, here's the wrong side with the seam allowance. This right side, seam allowance, right here. The right sides together, I'm going to line up that seam. I'm going to pin that right there, and we're going to stitch around this. And we'll start at this edge, and we'll stitch all the way up and around and then turn it inside out. And I'm pinning it just in a few places because there isn't as much bulk in this as there was in the other sewing that we just did. And when we're done, we'll turn it like this, and then it'll be lined. We've reached the end, we'll back stitch. Now we're going to reach in through the bottom, turn it right side out. There's our lining. This is the front with the pieces lined up at the top. Turn this down. And there we go. Now this whole bottom is all open. If we'd made the cowl, it would not have been, and we would have to close off the lining where we turned it. But this was easy to turn. There we go. Okay. So there's our lining. See how this is all encased all the way around, and it's open at the bottom. Now, we're ready to start adding the scarf. Now what we're going to do is to make the scarf, and the scarf is going to, the red is going to be the same color as the mane, and it's going to be a two-color scarf, and of course the main color of the cowl. So
We cut them as 6-inch strips that were 34 inches long.
Right.
So that we'll have a 5-inch scarf that's about 33 inches long.
we needed to add our seam allowances, and then what we did is we put the two ends together and stitched a 1/2-inch seam, and that gave us our long scarf. And so that's what we're going to do right now with the red. The black is already done. We're going to put the edges even, and we're going to take a 1/2-inch seam, just a straight seam.
This is going to be a mess here, this one.
And this seam pretty much will go at the back of where the curve comes around the top of the hood. There's our seam. Now, again, we're going to take the black with the seam already done and line up our seam allowances. Make sure the seams are open to eliminate a little of that bulk. The raw edges even, and we have to leave an opening because we have to be able to put the hood inside of here and attach it and then seal that up. So I'm going to come down, about 6 inches, maybe a little more, 6 inches on each side. What do you think, Joy?
I think I would give 8 to 10.
Okay, so how's that look?
That.
Is that
And
enough?
if you need to check, put the
Okay,
hood up against it.
you bet. Ooh, we're close, weren't we? There we go. Okay. I'll start right here. Put a pin there to hold it. And because this is just the 2 layers in there, it's thinner and it isn't ravelly, I'm just going to keep the raw edges even as I go. I'm not going to pin all this. If you feel more comfortable pinning it, that's certainly okay.
So we've decided to add a fringe to the scarf. I'm making these little bundles of yarn. I took about 14-inch segments. I put 6 of them together, and then I just tied it in a very basic knot, just around and through. Then I kind of line up the ends and pull the knot down to the end so it's sort of even. I'll trim it up a little bit later, but that just kind of will hold it together when we attach them inside the scarf. So I made 4 of these bundles of 6 for each end of the scarf.
Okay, so we're going to even up this edge because we want to add our fringe down here.
Hang in. Make sure that none of it gets curled up.
And caught in the stitching.
Yep, so I kind of push it way down in and then pull it back up.
Yep.
So that only the knot is showing on the inside of the...
And there's that knot.
Okay.
After we get them all in there, we can space them out a little better if we
Yep.
need to.
Don't want to lose it in there.
No,
That's another time when the knot comes in handy.
can find it. There we
Last one,
go. Okay.
number 4. I'm going to have you hold that a little closer
Okay.
over.
Give you more room.
Quick, yep. My fingers stuck in there. Okay, and then...
Okay,
space them
so
out. Yep.
we'll space them out a little bit. Let's find kind of the middle. Put 2 on one side of the middle, and there we go. You poke that one down in there a little further. What do you think, Joy?
I think it looks like it's going to work.
Okay, ready? And then we're going to stitch right across that.
Yeah, you might need to move your
And move
seam
my
allowance
seam guide out
a
of the
little
way.
bit because those knots will be in your way.
Yep. And I'm just going to slide it out of the way and just stitch across here. I'm going to use the edge of my presser foot as a guide this time.
These two kind of...
That one. You have to hold them down. 'Cause they want to move around. Let's see what we have here. So there's our seam. There's our knots. And what will happen when we turn it right side out, this is a lot easier than turning that strap on that purse was.
You can just grab the fringe
Just
and
reach
pull it.
in and pull. And there's how our fringe will be caught in the end of the seam.
And then the last thing that we'll do once we get it all turned, the other side done, is we'll trim that fringe to make sure it looks kind of even.
Right.
That's why I made sure it was 14 inches so you'd have plenty of space.
Easier to trim it off then. Okay. So we have all of our fringe in the middle, in between the red and the black sides of the scarf, and we have the knots out here. I'm going to stitch across this edge, and then when we flip it open, the fringe will be attached. Okay, now we're ready to turn our scarf inside out, right side out. So we can see the fringe. There's that one. Corners down in there. We didn't grade these corners because there's enough bulk in there already that we're not going to be able to get them any sharper than we are. what with the knots in there. There we go. So there's that one. And you can see how the fringe is encased in that seam. And we'll bring this side out. And there's that one. Put those corners out. Put these corners out. There we go. So now we have this opening that is going to be where we're going to attach the hood. So here is our scarf with this opening, and this is where we are going to attach the hood to the scarf. We're going to take all these ends with the fringe and we're going to put them inside the hood. And notice we're going to be putting right sides together, so the part we see out will be the wrong side where the seam stitching is. And we want to make sure we line up the seam of the scarf with the center seam of the hood. And line those two up. And we're going to do a lot of pinning on this because we want to make sure this goes where it's supposed to. So we're going to stitch that. I'm going to make sure those seam allowances are open. And I'm going to keep only sewing or pinning the black to the black so far. Coming around to the edge, I'm going to find this seam right about here, line that up. Come back. There we go.
2,000 years later.
So we have it all pinned together all the way around. We lined up the black, and we're leaving this space right here so we can turn this inside out. So we'll start here. We'll stitch our 1/2-inch seam around, all around where it's pinned, leaving this open. And then we'll close that up by hand after it's turned. This in there. We're ready to go with our 1/2-inch. Close to the end here. We're getting close to where the opening is, so we're going to stitch right up to here and back stitch. And we should be ready to turn this inside out. We'll bring it all back through this opening. Roll that over. And here we go, Joy. There it is. There's our scarf. Here's our opening, and we'll close that by hand here. That's just bulk. Okay. Stitch that together. And we can stitch that by hand because we don't want to stitch through into the back of the hood. Joy, we have our hood already, and our unicorn needs its horn. So here's the small horn that we did, and this has a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can see it isn't as wide as the others. So what we did is we pulled that pattern piece off, And then we lined up the straight edges. And we took a 1/4 inch seam right across there. And when we opened that up, it became the cone that's going to be the horn. Then we took some needle and thread, and we ran basting stitches along the base that we're going to pull up. They'll be gathering stitches. Now, to make our horn stay up, we're going to put some fiber fill down in here, and we're going to put it in smaller pieces so we can poke it clear down into the tip of the horn, because we want the horn to stand up. So you can see that big piece of fiberfill went clear down that far. Again, being careful not to poke through the fabric. And we'll kind of work that around in there so it's fairly smooth. And we've got that down. Now we're going to have put a little more in there. Thank you. There we go, some more. And my suggestion for this is, if you know somebody who likes to do crafting kind of things, they might have a whole bag of this, and then you won't have to buy a whole big bag, that they'd be willing to share some with you.
Something else that you can do if you don't have fiber fill is if you have scraps of fleece left over from when you were cutting out your hood and your different pieces, squish those up in there and that'll make a nice filling.
Because that fleece is very forgivable and it bends real. It's very soft. So there's our stitching that we did. Here's our gathering stitch around there, and I'm just going to pull that up. And what that's going to do is pull that together. And I'm going to hold it like this, and I'm going to take some stitches back and forth across this to hold that together, and it'll end up looking like this on the bottom. Looks like a strawberry. There it goes. Thank you. Yep. And I'll just keep taking a few more stitches on this one. And I'm going to leave this thread on here when I'm done closing this up, because then I can use that thread to attach this to the hood, because that's going to be a hand project. I'm just going to have that closed up. And I'm going to knot that just to hold that, because I don't want that to come unstitched. There we go. Now, okay, Joy, we have a lot of threads here right now. We're going to leave this one with the needle that we used to pull this up, because we're going to use that when we attach the horn to the hood. But first we have to make our unicorn have a spiral horn. So what we're going to do is take a little bit heavier thread, and we're going to wrap it around and pull. And that will give us a spiral on our, and when we get to the top, we're going to take a stitch and knot that. So that it holds the thread that we used to make our spiral. So we've got this looped around. We're going to tie a knot there, and that's going to hold our thread in place. And just because we want to really make sure it holds, I'm going to do another little knot right on top of that one. We don't want it to work its way loose after all that. There we go. Now, remember we left our thread on the base in place, so we're going to attach this now to the hood. Kind of right in the center, we're going to push, make sure that's flat, smooth. What do you think, Joey? Right? How far back to the main do we?
I would go pretty close.
Close to the main?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to turn that this way.
Yeah.
And before I start stitching, I'm going to pin this in place. And I'm going to pin it in place from the bottom. Check and make sure I like how that looks before I go any further.
Two hours later.
Now, we're just going to kind of stitch that around by hand. We're going to stitch by hand around the base between just the top of the hood and not necessarily the lining. So, here's my thread. Come up, catch this. Not that deep a bite. Get it secured and then keep going. And there we go with another little piece. Here we go, Joy.
Here we have it.
Marvelous. Unicorn.
Unicorn.
There we go with the scarf and the little dragon cowl with the cowl neck that would come around. And we're good to go.
Yeah.
Either one.
I'm excited.
It's been fun.
Thank you, Starry.
Great,
Thank
you're
you so
welcome.
much. And if you do go ahead and make one of the dragon or unicorn or whatever Pokemon creature you decide to make, send us a picture at the Shenandoah Public Library and you will earn your Imagine 2020 badge for the unicorn and dragon. So we hope we'll see you this summer, and be well and be safe.
Thank you. It
Thank
was
you.
fun. Bye.